Hey everybody, and welcome back to my channel, where today we are going to be doing my August mid-month wrap-up. So we're going to talk about everything that I read in the first 2 weeks of August. So it's been a little bit busy around my house, so I read a total, or attempted to read a total of 4 things, and they were a little bit all over the place, which was interesting. But the first thing that I finished in August is Educated by Tara Westover. So this is an adult nonfiction memoir, and obviously we're following Tara, who grew up in a very unusual situation in that her parents were fundamentalist religious, and her dad was also very anti-government, kind of a prepper, and her family decided, as part of all of that, decided to homeschool. And by the time Tara came around, because she is the youngest of 6 children, their homeschooling really didn't amount to much. And so when she went away to college, she found out just how much she does not know about the world, and she went about correcting that. Um, and that's what it says on the back of the book. Now, I will say that additionally, there is a very strong component of this book, which is that part of Tara's childhood household it included domestic abuse, and specifically against Tara. And when she goes away to college, she learns about a lot of what happened in her household when she was younger, and putting it in different contexts that she wouldn't have been able to do if she had not left home. And then obviously, so she's working through a lot of stuff, and also figuring out what she's going to be doing going forward. So that is a huge part of this storyline. And I will say, obviously, because that's such a large part, there are content warnings for all kinds of domestic abuse, basically everything that you would expect, minus sexual abuse. And it does have a very particular fundamentalist religious kind of flavor to it. So if you grew up in a really religious household, please be cautious. And there's also a little bit of animal cruelty in there. Now, I have already done a full length review for this book, so I'll keep this relatively short. I really liked this book. I thought it was very well done. Tara has this very interesting, unique kind of path through life. Like, just from how she grew up was so unusual, and then the path that she took through going to college and beyond was also just very interesting, very unique. I think that and then Tara's writing on top of that is also just very well done. This, like, for example, one of the things that I was really taken by is the fact that Tara walks this line between giving context for what she experienced without ever blaming any of the larger institutions. So, like, yes, some of the stuff that happened in her house was because her family was fundamentalist religious, but she doesn't, like, blame Mormonism, for example. It's just like how it was in her household was kind of a very specific flavor, I guess you could say. And so her walking that line between saying my household wasn't great, but the wider institution is not necessarily to blame, is a really hard thing to do. And I think she did an amazing job. And just how she drew out this narrative, it was just, again, because she had just an interesting story, and how she wrote it was also just really well done. I found this to be a very compelling, interesting kind of read, and I ended up giving this 4.5 stars. After that, I tried The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. And so this is an adult, I think, speculative fiction, and essentially we're following Nora, and Nora ends up in this place between life and death where the Midnight Library is, and essentially each book contains a life she could have lived if she had made slightly different choices. So she spends a lot of time there. And that's the premise of this story. Now, there are a lot of content warnings in this because the way that Nora gets to this place between life and death is, I believe, an attempted suicide. Now, I DNF'd this at page 24, so it was not confirmed for me, but that's, I mean, the first 24 pages was was us figuring out everything that happened in that one day that was awful, and then her decision that she was going to kill herself. So, like, yeah, a lot of content warnings here. Now, I DNF'd this because I just did not connect with this at all. So I found that the writing was surprisingly, like, emotionally flat. Like, there was no connection there. Nora herself is understandably very depressed, so she's a complete wet blanket. But for me, I think I would have preferred getting to know her a little bit before she got to this point in her life where she didn't want to live anymore. But we didn't. We just got to know her when she was so unhappy that it was all, it was the absolute worst for her. And so I didn't connect with the character. I didn't connect with the writing. Like, it just wasn't particularly great. And the other thing is, like, that's a little bit, is one of the things that when she's looking back on her life, she's saying, like, I was a really great swimmer. I could have been Olympic level. I could have trained for the Olympics. Our band got a record deal and then I backed out. Like, all of that kind of stuff. And it's basically every time, those 2 times that she was presented with this opportunity, she buckled under the pressure. And I'm just like, I don't find that as compelling as, like, just a regular person. And so I wasn't as interested in finding out what her life was going to be like with that kind of stuff. And I was very concerned, although this is not confirmed, that the eventual moral is going to be, if you just change your perspective, you won't be depressed anymore. Which is incorrect. That's a 100% incorrect way to look at depression. You cannot cure depression. There are certain things where it's like, if you change your perspective, it can help give you the jumps that you need, but, like, you can't cure it, and that's just not how it works. So yeah, I decided that this is absolutely not for me, so I DNF'd it at page 24. And then I finished Rejected Princesses by Jason Porath. And this is, the subtitle is Tales of History's Boldest Heroines, Hellions, and Heretics. And it's all about historical figures that are women. And it's really interesting. So it's a mix of actual historical figures that we have, like, that we know for sure lived, some that we don't know for sure lived, but we have a lot of stories about. There's some myths and fables in here as well. Basically, if it's an interesting woman, it's in here. I really appreciated the fact that we took historical figures and stories from all over the world. I was very appreciative of that. I did think that the mix of history and myth was interesting, although I will say, because it wasn't always clear how much historical fact we had backing up each story, which I didn't love. I like knowing more of, like, this is historical fact, and then this is where we're, like, putting the pieces together, and it might be kind of wrong. So I was a little iffy on that particular sense. I also didn't always love the writing. So the author has, like, asides in each of the stories that were a little bit snarky, sassy kind of things. Like, I don't mind pointing out that, hey, like, this story, we don't have any more information about this person because she got married and had babies, and that's about as, like, historians are super sexist, and so they just didn't write anything more down about this person. Like, I don't mind that, but just the way it was presented kind of irked me a little bit. The other thing is that I thought was really cool, but was that in the beginning, there is a gauge, and it basically says every story is going to be labeled with a number 1 through 5, and 1 is considered like a PG story, and a all the way up to 5, which is like mature audiences only. And I found that the way that that scale was applied didn't make a ton of sense to me. So I think that it's a great idea. I really love the idea. However, I did find that it didn't, like I said, it didn't really make sense, especially given that this is a book instead of a movie. So, for example, in the level 1, which is supposed to be PG, there was a mention of incest. And it really was just a mention. There was no context clues, so you couldn't figure out what it meant. And it was just like a mention, and then we moved on. But like, if I gave this to my older kid when he was 7 or 8, there is absolutely no way he was not going to be asking me what incest was. And so for me, that doesn't work. Do you know what I mean? I appreciate that all of those details, even if they were a little gruesome, were included. I just wish that how that scale was applied made a little bit more sense to me. But overall, I think that this is good. I am glad that it's out in the world, and I ended up giving it 3.5 stars. And then lastly, I finished Walk on Earth a Stranger by Rae Carson. This is the first book in the Gold Seer trilogy. And this is a young adult Old West fantasy trilogy where we are following our main character of Leah, and she has this ability to sense gold, which is great for the Old West because gold has been discovered in California. So she decides to take the journey from her home in Georgia out to California, and we are following her along on that journey. I ended up really, really enjoying this. One of the things that I do struggle with is that I don't love Old West settings, even fantasy Old West. It's just not really my thing. But Rae Carson does a really great job with characters. The setting itself was fine. I didn't hate it, but I didn't love it either. But I really, really liked the characters. Leah is 15, 16 years old, and she feels like a 15 or 16-year-old. When she makes decisions, oftentimes you can definitely tell what kind of an adult she is going to become, while also still not quite making the adult decisions, the full adult decisions. She still feels very much like a teenager, and it just really is interesting to watch her interact with adults and with kids and people her own age, and like when something, for example, racist is happening and she feels this urge to push back, but she doesn't really know how, and the few times that she does, she's not particularly effective, and it's very interesting because it feels very much like a 15 or 16-year-old. Additionally, kind of in the background, not quite in the background because it is still very YA, and so it's a little bit more forward, but it's not the focus of the story. We are interrogating what it like some of the how different people can have various layers. So you can be a great person in this wagon train and then turn around and be a racist jerk to the Native Americans. And that happens. And we have this interrogation on what a good Christian is, because one of the people that Leah ends up interacting with frequently you can tell that they think of themselves as a good Christian, but a lot of the good actions that they are taking are very pro forma, obviously being done because of a sense of obligation rather than having a true compassionate kind of heart. And we get some of that in here, which all of this I found utterly interesting. Which is great because the actual journey itself is interesting enough. It's just very straightforward. So having this extra character stuff really made the plot feel a lot fuller than it actually truly was. I not to say that like I thought that the plot was thin or it wasn't good. It just filled it out very nicely. I will say this was a buddy read with Julie, and we both very much felt like this kind of felt like how it felt to play the Oregon Trail game, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. I really liked where we ended up. I know that the next book is going to make me angry. This is a reread, so like of this trilogy. So I know the next book is not going to be great, but I did like this book. I like where we ended. I like where we're going. I just enjoyed my time with this, and I ended up giving it 4.25 stars. So that is it. That is everything that I read in the first 2 weeks of August. Comment down below. Let me know what you've been reading, if you have any thoughts about what I've been reading. But that is all I have for this video. So if you like it, please give it a thumbs up. And until next time, have happy reading, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.